Kevin Durant dominated the conversation at Summer League, and with so many questions flying around, it's time to parse out what we know, what we think, and then what we want to happen with Kevin Durant. So I want to start with what we know, and let's start with the man there's no one who knows more than him, who is more plugged in the NBA. It's senior insider Adrian Wojnarowski. And Woj, you were in Vegas along with the entire NBA world. What's the latest with Kevin Durant?
And Malika, the Nets asking price for Kevin Durant remains steep. And, they're trying to await teams and trying to get teams to meet that price. And that's certainly multiple draft picks, all-star level players. Listen, they want a return, that speaks to the stature of who Kevin Durant is, where he is in his career. 34 years old, a player, with 4 years left on his contract. They don't have to be in a rush to do a deal. They do have time on their side, especially because of the time of the year this is. And again, a player with 4 years left on his deal. And Sean Marks came out to Vegas with the intent of talking with other team executives about Kevin Durant. That's been going on. But the Nets asking price, certainly, it is steep, and it is, I think, going to allow this to be a process that goes on, because there's really no motivation for the Nets to rush into a deal or to move quickly on a deal unless it's something they consider, something of a monumental return for Durant.
So general manager Sean Marks is out in Las Vegas, and so is Kyrie Irving. He was there for a couple of days. We watched him take in a few games. What more can you tell us about where things stand with him?
Yeah, Brooklyn's really focused on Kevin Durant and trying to figure out if there's a deal to be had for him in the marketplace. I think Kyrie Irving is on the back burner of that. There were conversations with the Lakers last week. I'm told that that's not continued. I think both sides know where they stand. And I think for the Nets, getting a clear indication of what the future looks like with Kevin Durant before they make any decision on how Kyrie Irving fits into that. That's the sense other teams have with the situation, and I think it's the sense of what the Nets are doing. So I think their focus with the Nets right now is figuring out, is there a deal out there for Kevin Durant? And I think Kyrie Irving is secondary to that, and I think his future may be, decided off of how the Nets operate and the kind of decisions they make around KD.
Woj, thank you so much for that. Enjoy the rest of Summer League and Las Vegas if you can. So that's exactly what we know. And I want to shift a little bit to what we think, but we just heard something very interesting from Woj. We had talked in the past about whether or not we could have seen Kyrie as the first domino to fall instead of Kevin Durant, and now it seems that is the inverse. So I do want to bring in someone who's able to prognosticate not only what's going on in Utah, but the entire league. It's senior writer Brian Windhorst. And Brian, based on what you are hearing, what do you think is going to happen with Kevin Durant and Kyrie here?
Yeah, we're probably into a stalemate here, Malika. It's not unusual from what we've seen in other star trades in other years. The Kawhi Leonard trade to Toronto is an example of this. Dwight Howard about a decade ago with something that didn't happen to Los Angeles until August, where their asking price and the market value there's a delta in between, and it takes an event in some cases to make those things fall together. In this case, what we might watch for is any communication from Kevin Durant himself about if he were to come out and say his feelings about potentially returning to the Nets, for example, which is something that hasn't been ruled off the table if the Nets can't find a deal that they like. Or maybe a comment about what teams he may or may not have interest in. But that may not happen at all. And nothing may happen for a while. There may be a decision by the Nets at some point to reduce what they're looking for. Yeah. But they don't have to do that. Certainly shouldn't do that this early in the process. So my guess is we're going to be stuck here for a while until something else comes in and changes the situation.
Stuck watching, waiting, and listening to see what happens with Kevin Durant and Andrews. And I'm here with the best in the business. It's senior NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski. And Woj, free agency, it really is in full swing. It's almost time for all of us to hop on a plane, head to Las Vegas for Summer League. But the basketball world is still on Kevin Durant watch. So where does his trade request stand as of right now, this moment today?
And Malika, listen, Brooklyn continues to talk to teams around the league. And,
Try to see in a lot of scenarios, if there are multiple team deals they could put together to get back the assets that they would want for Kevin Durant, which are immense. You saw, I think, part of the baseline set with the Rudy Gobert trade, and essentially 5 first-round picks, and that would only be, I think, part of the return Brooklyn would want. They want high-level players, perhaps an all-star, and then more players. They think this should look like one of the biggest trade returns in league history, because there's never been quite a player like Kevin Durant on the market. And I think as executives get to Vegas this week, a lot are going to arrive in town Thursday, Friday, ahead of the weekend. I think there's an expectation that GMs and team presidents getting in front of each other, Sean Marks being able to visit face-to-face with other GMs, I think that could be helpful in putting deals together.
Well, given that price tag, that asking request is going to be so high, that it is so immense, is there a path here, Woj, where we could see Kevin Durant return to Brooklyn?
Absolutely, especially, Malika, if this drags out and if there's not a deal found here in the next month and it goes into August and you get closer to training camp, Brooklyn, they don't have to take a deal that they don't want to do. They don't have to talk themselves into a deal. But then at the same time, I think Kevin Durant, as he looks at the situation, could he look at it differently over time? That's certainly a possibility. And I think as you look, if you're Kevin Durant and you start to look at the teams that you might land at, and then what those teams might look like after they have to unload so many assets, I think that's why there's no rush in this process. And I think perhaps there'll be a time where there's better communication going on between Brooklyn and Kevin Durant, and maybe that could impact the idea of him returning. But I don't think anybody's counting on it. And I think all sides are, proceeding as though, listen, that Kevin Durant will be traded at some point. But because of the years left on his contract, 4 years on his contract, and the fact that this is the off season, things can change, they can evolve, there's no question. Maybe at some point the Nets come to Kevin Durant with a trade and say, hey, here's something we're about to do. And he looks at it and says, maybe I'd rather stay here. Now, he doesn't have say. Brooklyn could go forward with it. I just think, Malika, there are a lot of scenarios where certainly Kevin Durant gets moved, but yes, where he could stay, because people do change their minds. They change course. And the fact is, he's under contract, and they still have a very talented, pretty talented deep team in Brooklyn that, when you look at it up against other teams in the league, should be, with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving playing at a high level, should believe they can play with anybody.
Well, one of those players that is on that team as we stand here in this moment is Kyrie Irving. He opted into that roughly $37 million player option just a couple of weeks ago. How does he factor into how Kevin Durant is weighing his trade request here?
Yeah, and I think that's another consideration Brooklyn has to make about whether it's a positive or negative to move Kyrie Irving either before Kevin Durant or after Kevin Durant. The market is certainly very different for Kyrie Irving, and the Nets have talked with the Lakers, and I believe there's been, back and forth in communication. And, you look at where there's cap space right now. A team like San Antonio could be a facilitator right now in a let's say a Russell Westbrook, Kyrie Irving deal between the teams. They have the cap space. Now you would have to incentivize them at a pretty high level. And I think that's, I think the willingness of the Lakers to incentivize a deal with multiple draft picks, I think that's still, part of the reason, that's a deal that hasn't gone anywhere yet. That can always change. Again, Rob Pelinka, Sean Marks in Vegas this week and moving forward. I'm sure they'll have conversations there. But I do think that's part of the equation for Brooklyn is, again, do they handle the Kevin Durant deal first and then revisit this? And I think the Lakers' motivation, they've looked at other deals. They've continued, I know, to check in on Eric Gordon in Houston. That's certainly a player that interests them. Buddy Hield in Indiana. Different kinds of guards, shooting guards certainly both of those players, former Rob Pelinka clients, right, healed Eric Gordon. So the Lakers are looking out at different scenarios.